There is a particular kind of silence that happens right before a professional trader takes a position. Not hesitation, not analysis, something closer to recognition. The way a surgeon looks at an X-ray and knows within seconds what needs to happen, before they've consciously processed every data point. The way a chess grandmaster sees the board and feels, not calculates, feels where the game is going. It lasts roughly 3 seconds, sometimes less. And if you've spent serious time around experienced traders, the ones who've survived long enough to develop something that can't quite be taught from a textbook, you notice it. There is a quality to their attention at the moment of decision that is fundamentally different from what you see in traders who are still developing. The developing trader deliberates. They check, recheck, consult their rules. The experienced trader arrives at the chart, looks, and knows. Or they look and walk away. What is happening in those 3 seconds? That question is worth taking seriously. Because most of the conversation in trading education circles is about what to look for. The patterns, the indicators, the confluences. Very little of it is about the nature of the looking itself, about what has to change inside a person for that kind of instantaneous clarity to become available. That is the conversation I want to have today. And I want to start by being honest about what this is not. It is not intuition in the soft, mystical sense. It is not a gift that some traders have and others don't. It is not pattern recognition in the shallow sense of having memorized a few setups. What professional traders develop over years of deliberate practice is something that neuroscience has a precise name for. Something that operates below the level of conscious analysis. And something that, once you understand its mechanism, you can actually cultivate rather than just hope to stumble into. The concept is called perceptual expertise, and understanding it may be the most important thing you do as a developing trader this year. Gary Klein, a cognitive psychologist who spent decades studying how experts make decisions under pressure, conducted what became a landmark series of studies on firefighters, military commanders, and intensive care nurses. He wanted to understand how experts make life or death decisions in seconds, with incomplete information. What he found dismantled the assumption that expert decision-making was faster analysis. It wasn't analysis at all, not in the traditional sense. The firefighters weren't running through a checklist of possible causes and selecting the best option. They were perceiving the situation as a whole and recognizing it as a type they had encountered before, not consciously. The recognition happened before the conscious mind had formed a question. Klein called this recognition-primed decision-making, the RPD model, and it maps onto trading in ways that are so direct they're almost uncomfortable to read, because they reveal exactly how far most traders are from the kind of performance they are working toward. In the RPD model, the expert doesn't generate options and compare them. They perceive a situation. The perception triggers a pattern match against thousands of stored experiences, and that pattern match produces a course of action almost simultaneously. The conscious mind then runs a brief simulation, not an analysis, a simulation, a kind of mental forward projection, to check whether the action seems viable. If it does, they act. If the simulation reveals a problem, they adjust. But the initial recognition happened in the first fraction of a second. Everything after that is confirmation, not discovery. Now think about what that means for trading. It means that the 3-second moment we're describing isn't a shortcut. It isn't the lazy version of proper analysis. It is the culmination of thousands of hours of deliberate engagement with the market, compressed into a single perceptual act. The trader who looks at a chart and knows within seconds isn't skipping steps. They've already done the steps, thousands of times, until those steps became invisible. But here is where it gets complicated, and where I want to spend real time, because this is the part that almost no one discusses honestly. Not all fast pattern recognition is the same. There is a version of quick decision-making that looks like expertise from the outside, but is actually something quite different. It is the confidence of a trader who has developed a strong, fast gut feeling that is based on a skewed sample of experience, on remembered wins and conveniently forgotten losses, on a few patterns that worked spectacularly in a particular market regime and have been unconsciously overgeneralized to every environment since. And the 3-second recognition of a genuinely skilled trader is built on calibrated experience, The 3-second recognition of a trader who has mistaken confidence for competence is built on noise. They look identical in the moment of execution. The difference only reveals itself over hundreds of trades, over months and years of statistical exposure. One compounds, the other bleeds. This is why the 3-second rule is not something you can hack or shortcut into. It is something you have to earn, in a specific way, through a specific kind of practice that most traders are not actually doing, even when they think they are. Most traders practice by trading. They take positions, they make money or lose it, and they accumulate experience in that way. The problem is that this form of practice is extraordinarily noisy. Any given trade outcome contains an enormous amount of random variance. A great entry can produce a loss. A terrible entry can produce a profit. And if your brain is learning primarily from outcomes, which it will unless you deliberately override that tendency, you are training yourself on a signal-to-noise ratio that is functionally terrible. What expert traders do, often without realizing they're doing it, which is part of what makes them hard to interview about their process, is they develop a practice of repeated engagement with price structure that is decoupled from outcome. They study what setups look like before they resolve. They build a visual and conceptual library not of things that worked, but of things that are, of structural conditions, of the quality of a move, the behavior of price at a level, the character of a rejection. They are building a perceptual vocabulary, not a win library. Think about what a musician does when they practice scales. They are not practicing winning. They are not even practicing songs. They are building a tactile and auditory vocabulary for the instrument, one that eventually allows musical expression to flow through them without conscious mediation. The 3 seconds a jazz musician takes to respond to a chord change is built on 10,000 hours of that foundational work. They are not thinking about theory in the moment. The theory became embodied, and then it disappeared as a conscious process. There is a direct parallel to what happens when a trader reaches genuine perceptual expertise. The technical knowledge, the understanding of structure, of supply and demand imbalances, of how institutional order flow manifests in price action, doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes the substrate of perception rather than the content of analysis. And this is the point where identity becomes relevant. Because I think there is a specific psychological obstacle that prevents many experienced traders from reaching this level, even after years of practice. It is the obstacle of needing to be right in a way that is visible. When you analyze out loud, when you run through your confluence checklist, when you narrate your reasoning, when you require your decision to be justifiable in real time, you are performing competence as much as you are exercising it. And that performance need creates a specific kind of cognitive interference. It keeps you at the surface of the process rather than allowing you to drop into the deeper level where perceptual expertise actually lives. The traders who develop the 3-second recognition most fully are almost uniformly people who have made peace with the idea that they cannot always explain why a trade looks right. They have accepted that the expertise lives in a place that is partially pre-verbal, and they have stopped requiring their own process to be fully articulable as a condition of trusting it. That is a difficult threshold to cross, especially for analytically oriented people, especially for traders who came from backgrounds where explicit reasoning was the standard of competence. The engineer, the lawyer, the academic. These people often make excellent students of trading and frustrating practitioners of it, because the very cognitive habits that made them successful in their previous domains create resistance to the kind of tacit knowledge that trading ultimately requires. Now let me bring this into the actual experience of a trade. It is morning. The opening range has formed on a futures contract you've been watching for 4 years. In those 4 years, you have seen this instrument open, form a range, break, fail, reverse, trend, chop, and do every combination of those things across hundreds of different macro environments, different volatility regimes, different seasonal patterns. You have not cataloged these consciously. You could not recite the statistics. But the visual memory of all of it lives somewhere in your perceptual system, and it is active every time you look at this chart. The range is narrow, the price behavior within it has a particular quality, contained, orderly, no significant rejection wicks. The higher time frame context is constructive, and then price begins to move toward the upper boundary, and something happens in your perception. Not a thought, exactly. More like a shift in visual weight. The chart has a kind of resolution to it that you cannot fully articulate, but that you have felt before in trades that worked. Your hand moves toward the entry before your analytical mind has formally endorsed the decision. You enter. You are right. Now, here is the important question. What was actually happening in those 3 seconds? All what was happening was a rapid, largely unconscious pattern match across your stored library of similar structural conditions, producing a probability assessment that never surfaced as a number, but registered as a felt sense of rightness. Your brain ran Klein's simulation almost instantly and returned a green light. The entire process was faster than deliberate analysis could operate, and more accurate because it integrated more variables than conscious cognition can hold simultaneously. But here is what is equally important to understand. In a different setup, on a different morning, you look at the chart, and nothing happens. There is no felt sense of resolution. The chart looks like a chart, and you do not trade, because the absence of recognition is itself information. The 3-second rule works in both directions. The expert doesn't just recognize winners quickly, they recognize the absence of a winner quickly, and that recognition is equally decisive. This is what separates perceptual expertise from impulsive pattern matching. The impulsive trader feels compelled to find a trade. Their perceptual system is biased toward recognition because they need to act. The expert has no such need. They are genuinely comfortable with the possibility that today, there is nothing to trade, and that comfort is not passivity. It is the hard-won product of having been wrong enough times on forced trades that the lesson finally became cellular. There is a concept in martial arts that is relevant here. In Zen-inflected Japanese fighting traditions, it is called mushin, no mind. The state of the practitioner who has so thoroughly internalized their art that conscious deliberation has been replaced by a kind of fluid responsiveness to what is actually present. The practitioner who has not reached mushin is always slightly behind, responding to what they thought they saw, to what their analysis told them was coming, rather than to what is. The practitioner who has reached it is in the moment without being consumed by it. I am not suggesting traders pursue mystical states. I am pointing at something that has a very concrete psychological and neurological basis. The traders who have genuinely internalized their edge have a relationship with the present moment of price action that is clean, not filtered through elaborate cognitive machinery, not mediated by anxiety about being wrong. Just direct contact with what is actually happening, matched against a deeply stored library of what that kind of happening tends to mean. That directness is what produces the 3-second moment. Now, practically speaking, how does a serious trader actually develop this? The most honest answer is that it takes longer than most people want to hear. Perceptual expertise in domains of high complexity does not develop in months. Across the research, estimates for genuine pattern recognition expertise in complex domains cluster around 3 to 7 years of deliberate, reflective practice, not 3 to 7 years of having an account open. 3 to 7 years of engaged, intentional study of the specific market and setup type you are developing expertise in. But within that timeline, there are practices that accelerate the process and practices that impede it. What accelerates it is radical specificity. The trader who tries to develop pattern recognition across 12 instruments, 4 strategies, and 3 time frames simultaneously is diluting the very learning process that expertise requires. The pattern library needs repetition of similar situations to build. If you are constantly encountering novel configurations, you are generating raw experience rather than refined expertise. The traders who develop the 3-second recognition most reliably are those who narrowed their focus to something specific, and then immersed themselves in it so thoroughly that the patterns became automatic. What also accelerates it is deliberate post-trade review that focuses on structural quality rather than outcome. The question is not, did this trade work? The question is, was the structural condition I identified actually present? And did I execute when it was present, or when I wanted it to be present? That distinction is everything. The developing trader frequently enters trades that don't quite meet their own criteria, because the pressure to act distorts their perception. Building the habit of honest structural assessment, not outcome assessment, trains the perceptual system toward accuracy rather than toward reward seeking. What impedes the process is outcome-based learning. The brain that is learning from wins and losses rather than from structural quality will develop pattern recognition, but it will be the wrong patterns. Patterns associated with feeling confident, with high volatility environments that produce memorable wins, with the cognitive biases that shape memory rather than the objective structure that actually predicted the outcome. What also impedes it, and this is subtle, is the ongoing use of complex analytical frameworks as a substitute for developing genuine perception. There is a seductive stability in a rule-based system. It tells you what to do. It removes the ambiguity of trusting your own perception. And for a developing trader, this is appropriate. Rules are scaffolding. They prevent catastrophic errors while the deeper learning is accumulating. But scaffolding is meant to come down eventually. The trader who never removes the scaffolding, who continues to require explicit rule confirmation even after years of experience, is preventing the consolidation of their tacit knowledge into genuine expertise. They are keeping the process conscious when it needs to become unconscious. The transition is uncomfortable. Trusting perception before you have calibrated it is dangerous, but there is a middle stage, which many experienced traders actually occupy without realizing it, where the perception is ready, but the analytical overlay is preventing it from operating cleanly, where the 3-second moment is available, but the trader immediately overrides it with a checklist and either confirms what they already knew, or second-guesses themselves into inaction. Learning to recognize which stage you're in, and to act accordingly, is itself a form of expertise. There is a trader I want to describe, not by name, but by the quality of their attention. They trade a single index futures market, 1 or 2 setups, primarily in the first 2 hours of the session. They have been doing this for 9 years. When they describe their process, they struggle. They use phrases like, "the chart was right," or "it had a clean feeling," or "I just knew." These phrases frustrate journalists and educators who want something more transmissible. But when you sit with them and watch them work, what you observe is extraordinary precision. They see things in the chart that are not visible to the intermediate trader, not because the visual information is different, but because their perceptual system has been refined by thousands of hours of engagement into something that simply processes the same image differently. They are not smarter than the intermediate trader. They are more deeply practiced. Here is what I want you to take away from that picture, because it contains something both inspiring and demanding. The inspiring part. This level of perceptual expertise is available to any trader willing to do the work in the right way. It is not a natural gift. The research on expertise is consistent on this point. Extraordinary perceptual performance in complex domains is the product of deliberate practice, not innate talent. The demanding part. It requires a form of commitment that is different from simply being passionate about trading. It requires the discipline to narrow, to specialize, to repeat, to review honestly, to tolerate the long period of development during which you are better than a beginner, but not yet operating from genuine expertise. That middle period is where most traders stagnate or quit, not because they lack ability, but because they lack the patience to let the deep learning accumulate without trying to shortcut it. The 3-second rule is real. Professional traders do spot winners in seconds, but those seconds are backed by years of specific structured experience that has been internalized to the point of invisibility. What you are really building as a developing trader is not a strategy. Strategies are external. What you are building is a perceptual system, an internal architecture for seeing the market in a way that is both accurate and fast. And that system is not built by reading more, or by adding more indicators, or by finding the right rules. It is built by looking at the same kinds of setups, in the same market, honestly and repeatedly, over a long enough period of time that the patterns stop being things you check for, and start being things you simply see. There is a moment in that process, and no one can tell you exactly when it arrives, where something shifts, where the chart stops being a problem to be solved and starts being a place you recognize, where the 3 seconds of silence before a trade are not the silence of deliberation, but the silence of arrival. That moment cannot be rushed, but it can be worked toward, with intention, with honesty, one trade at a time,